Hi, this is Scott Shaw. Today I'm trying something new with Oddball Comics, something I've been doing on and off for 40 years, but this is the first time I've ever done an Oddball Comics show entirely devoted to one character, and that's everybody's favorite, Batman. And you're going to see Batman stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I guarantee it doesn't get any odder than this. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the wacky world of Batman. Alright, this was my first exposure to Batman. It was a comic where he goes to another planet, and as you can see, he and Robin are wearing rocket-powered roller skates on the cover, which is something we always associate with Batman. They go to a planet that where all the fruit is giant, and they use giant fruit to conquer the bad guys, which always cracked me up even as about 6 years old. The other first Batman comic I read was this one, which had it wasn't really a giant robot, it was just bigger than Batman, so that made it giant. And as we see, Robin's in the corner there looking up, although he's not explaining anything. And finally, the one that really made a big influence on me was the alien Superman in World's Finest. Batman and Robin were really bystanders to me. I was more interested in the idea of how come a guy that's already an alien now turns into an alien and everybody's upset. But these were the three introductions I had to Batman. As you can see, he wasn't solving mysteries here. He was fighting monsters. And that's kind of where he was in that genre. But Batman started out like everything else in the superheroes in the 1940s. Late 30s actually, but reached its kind of gestation period in the early 40s. And as you can see, there were plenty of oddball covers back then, but they were kind of more related to the stories, and in this case, this Dick Sprang cover, incredibly clever. We also had the first sign of the goofy Batman's coming up with the gorilla boss of Gotham City here, with a criminal with his brain transplanted into a surrogate King Kong. And Batman Indian Chief, calling him Man of the Bats and Little Raven. How exciting. But even, of course, there's this one where they're all showing off those big cannons between their legs. But besides that, the real interest I have here is stuff that started in the 50s, like those early ones I bought. And here, of course, we have our first Batman gorilla since the gorilla boss, Mogo the Bat Ape. And Mogo is apparently wearing that mask so he doesn't endanger any of the gorillas in his family. Then here's Batman saving Robin from a giant hand. And we have characters there that look like their heads are Christmas ornaments or something. I have no idea what's going on here, and frankly, the explanation would be a lot less interesting than the cover. Okay, here's Batmite. This is a good time to talk about this. Mart Weisinger was the most successful editor at DC Comics because he handled all the Superman titles. And he understood all these different tricks to try to get kids to plunk down their dimes because he wanted them to be intrigued by what was inside, but at the time it was kind of tough to stand there at the comic rack and read all the funny books. So the editor of the Batman comics, which a guy named Jack Schiff, and Jack Schiff had the clever idea of, we'll just do everything they were doing in Superman but with Batman. So instead of Mr. Mxyzptlk, we'll have Batmite. And instead of hating Superman, he loves Batman and gets him in trouble because he's trying to help him. It also has another spin-off character like Supergirl. There's Batwoman. But the funniest thing about this is it's obviously aimed for kids, but what kid knows what a publicity agent is? All right, now we have two things going on here. We have a monster that looks like a gummy bear, and we have Batman and Robin who look like they've been run over by a bulldozer. Between the two of them, I think this was absolutely irresistible. And then we have what looks like a Muppet attacking Batman and Robin. And I love this thing. Okay. Batman and Robin as insectoids. The funny thing is I put this show together, I suddenly realized that they're pulling the boat up out of the water, but this thing is so poorly colored, I never even noticed that at first. I just thought it was making a getaway. There you go. Again, they're a long way from Gotham City here, the ruler of the bewitched valley. This monster doesn't look like a Muppet. This one looks more like a sock puppet. And then there's not only Bat Hound in action, the Jack Schiff version of Crypto the Superdog, we also have a monster that looks like the mascot of one of those exterminator companies. And occasionally in the 1950s and early 60s, they'd actually do the effort to have him fighting another villain. In this case, it's in an imaginary story in the future, and it's old Batman and an old Joker who looks even more like Cesar Romero instead of the other way around here. And their clever way of showing that these are the sons of Batman, Robin, or they have the Roman numeral for 2 underneath their bat insignias. I don't know if young Joker Jr. has anything on his chest, but I imagine he does. Another giant hand cover. I guess that first one sold well, and plus a big reminder that there's a new Batmite adventure, so it's kind of like he was taking over the book at this point. Speaking of Batmites, here's Jim Henson's Bat Babies. Yes, Batman becomes Bat Baby. And in this case, they've got the crook in the corner explaining it. Alright, Bat Hound was good, but we got to give him a superpower. How about flaming breath? That always gets the readers interested. As a kid, too, I loved the fact that superheroes were always saying Great Scott, because it was something I absolutely agreed with. Alright, again, this is the closest thing he seemed to get to solving crime in Gotham City, is he finds out the head of the gangs in Gotham City is from outer space. This was all influenced by all the spate of monster movies and sci-fi movies in the 50s, but these are much more interesting than those movies. This cracks me up, not because Batmite's there, but I can't figure out at what point did Batman and Robin think that those little mini helicopters were a good idea. Leonardo da Vinci couldn't make them work. Why do they think they can? And of course, we couldn't get King Kong, but we can shoot Batman off the Empire State Building. I mean, the Gotham State Building. And this is interesting. This is one of those comics where Batman is accidentally makes it clear that he's Bruce Wayne, so every day he wears a different color Batman suit to get people distracted from the fact that he blew it. This was a completely typical Batman story until DC realized they had a lot of gay readers, so they made a whole set of Batman, Rainbow Batman action figures. I think the whole set cost $80, but it certainly was an interesting thing. By the way, they advertised this as being from a classic Batman story, and as far as I know, I was the only one that considered it a classic. All right. Giant Batman, that's good. I don't know what Robin's about to... Well, it says he's putting a siren on his belt, which is a strange idea, too. It's like, watch out. Watch out for what's under this belt. This thing reminds me of an M.C. Escher illustration for some reason. I keep thinking that if I turn this around some way, it'll make sense. But I like it. Of course... Let's rip off the creature from the Black Lagoon. We'll just call it the Green Lagoon. That's enough. And the monster's different. He's bigger. This is an interesting rip-off because it's a rip-off of a rip-off. This image was originally on an issue, I believe, of Thrilling Wonder Stories, or one of those pulp magazines that DC Superman editor Mort Weisinger edited. he ripped it off when he was publishing Jimmy Olsen, or editing Jimmy Olsen, and he put the same monster like that, except it was Jimmy. A few months later, it turns up on a Batman cover. I'm not surprised. I think they actually brought him back on a recent issue of Jimmy Olsen. But, you know, here's somebody did their homework on the cover, which I appreciated very much. But here's Robin the robot. We get to see Batman as a robot later. We see some of the easiest to draw aliens of all time here. Things are getting boring because now they're adding all these extra characters that aren't very interesting, and even Batmites behind all this. What Tarzan's doing there with... You know, it looks like the artist never even saw a rhinoceros. That's the thing I like most about this. First of all, he's got 2 horns on his head. That's interesting. Talk about Leonardo da Vinci. Here he's got the flying bat cave, which is a really good way to make your secret identity or secret headquarters really obvious to the rest of the world. Dr. No Face. This came out not too long after Dr. No, so some clever person said, well, we can use that to our advantage. I don't know who they had just fought, but boy, they really must have gotten beat up to be wearing bandages like that. Those aren't mummy costumes. This is just an interesting cover design with the robot brain gassing Batman and Robin. Should be in his stomach or something. This looks like a planet ruled by Pokemon characters to me. I don't know why, and they look really bored. Actually, that is a Pokemon character in the cage in the background, I think. And as a kid, I was so grateful because DC decided we do so many weird Batman stories. Let's just collect them every couple of years into an annual here. And you see, this one is probably the most normal one, although they have strange costumes. You're going to see more strange costumes. And here it's the all the different weird roles. They got Jungle Batman. They got Batman wearing a kilt. Underseas Batman. And then this one, you'll see some of these in this actual show. But this is how we learned about old comics and how I was alive and collecting comics when they were this weird, but it was really nice to see them all over again. And of course, here's the Gorilla Boss making his second appearance. All this stuff added up, by the way. DC is marketing all this stuff like crazy. I got this at Comic-Con, I think in 2019, thanks to my son who waited around in line and got these. It was an exclusive. And you see here we have Rainbow Batman, the actual Batman from the 50s, Negative Batman, and Zebra Batman. You need them all. Alright, over in World's Finest Comics, the same sort of weird stuff was going on here. Batman and Robin, along with Superman in every issue. They're solving the mystery of Mother Goose interacting with a talking goose. Caveman from Krypton. That's a gimmick we never thought of. I like the fact Superman's hitting him so hard that Batman and Robin are falling down. It's like, why? This guy's just disgusting. I remember buying this comic, and those waddles around his mouth bothered me a lot. But even now, and I thought of this when I was 9 or so, why does he have all those hooks on his belt? What are those for? What is he gonna hang somebody's guts on there? It's not in the comic, but it's just disturbing. And then this is kind of like the origin of Gremlins, you know. It's like, oh, he's like a little slow Loris, and now he's a Wolverine. Oh, that's nice. And this monster just cracks me up. This cover, surprisingly, is by Kurt Schaffenberger, who had nothing to do with World's Finest at this time. I think they needed to give him a job, but this is beautiful. But that's exactly the monster that Dick Sprang, who drew the story inside, did. We have a skinny Batman. I don't know what the heck that is, actually. He's drawn and drawn out. And then we have the inflated Batman. Should have been the Pinata Batman. And then I showed you those Batman Giants a few minutes ago. Well, here's the Batman Giant and those little mini ones you get in the cereal boxes. This represents all the different versions of Batman. When the Batman show started airing, boy did DC take advantage of that. This was the first story that has all the goofiness. And it turns out the big clue on the cover is, by that time Batman had that yellow oval around the bat insignia, making it a much better target for bad guys. You know, they were into camp. Those go-go checks, they thought that made these hip, and here they have a human pencil eraser rubbing out their nether regions for some reason. It's like, no sex in this comic, kids, don't worry. Here they're selling everything, and everyone's crying because Batman sold out. Well, I think Batman sold out a long time before this. Probably the best way to destroy a logo ever. This comic got a lot of attention because in my memory it's one of the first times they literally destroyed a logo and made it part of the cover design in a more interesting way. Carmine Infantino's work with Murphy, Anderson, inking. It's probably the best cover you'll see here. Oh, this is funny to me. Another one of those annuals, but it's like, oh, well, the negative's laying around here. Let's stick the negative of this up there. That'll look real freaky to kids. It's like, it stands out all right, but none of us had any idea what we were looking at or why. It's the moment that changed Batman's life, though, the moment that he showed a negative photostat on the cover of a Batman comic. Then Batman is trying to buy Batman comics, and of course, that's DC's Saul Harrison there behind the counter. And they've got every comic except Batman, which is great for DC because this means now they're selling all the other comics. Batman's doing great, but Hawkman, it's on the edge of cancellation, folks. Back to Gorillas. We're on some... These are now all in the 60s here. This is the new version of Batman, as you've seen, not the old kind with the Dick Tracy-like jaw. Here he's fighting the living beast bomb. The Batmobile comes to life and it's after him like a wild animal. It's like a speed buggy or something. They had to come up with new characters that were like existing characters, but we never saw again. Here's the Clue Master. Instead of the Riddler, he's the Clue Master. This is a cool cover just because it has Carmine Infantino's gimmick of having hands describe what's going on the cover. And probably took him 15 minutes to do those close-ups, but it took him more time to draw those hands. Then here's the big mystery, this guy that looks like he's got some sort of skin disease, or one of Little Dot's uncles. It's actually Alfred the Butler turned into a monster. And The Outsider was lifted from an H.P. Lovecraft story, so there you go. Here we have Batman and Robin with Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson on the cover with a disc jockey named William B. Williams. And I don't know what DC paid him or what he paid them, but nobody out here had any idea who this guy was. I think maybe in New York it sold, and comics were made in New York. Maybe they didn't know the rest of the country had no idea who this guy was. Here Batman destroys Gotham City, and then when you read the comic you realize it's a model of Gotham City that he's discovered. What a jip, man. The Getaway Genius, that's almost as good as the Clue Master, right? This is interesting. Let's let you do a lot of the work for this cover. And of course, now in the day of Photoshop, we know exactly what the bad guy looked like. You know, that girl represents powerful women these days, but back then they thought it was more of a joke because here she's not fighting because she has the run in her tights. Over in Brave and the Bold, where they were combining Batman with other characters, there you have all the standard Batman villains laughing because they call him the Bat Hulk, which is kind of astonishingly bold because instead of the Bat Hulk, he just kind of looks like a guy that sat in his easy chair eating Cheez-Its and reading comics for the last year and a half while he's on lockdown. But that's where you go. This was something DC liked to do all the time, and this one's probably the most interesting case. They'd take characters, and for some reason they would be split completely down the middle, and one would be a monster and the other guy would be a good-looking guy, or in this case, it's Superman only with green skin on one side and Batman on the other. And the whole explanation is this character was created when lightning hit a bunch of action figures in a museum and gave him the powers of the Legion of Superheroes. That's all I'm going to say. Then it broke down. Let's show Batman and Robin doing like a game at the county fair, trying to throw darts in the eyes of your friends and enemies. Here they exploited the old thing. Superman's now a caveman. Batman is from the future with a giant inflated head. We all knew Bruce Wayne had a giant inflated head already. And here they have children. It's one of those imaginary stories. I thought they were all imaginary, but that's just me. And they're using these characters now. That's now a standard thing at DC. The Bizarros invaded World's Finest. Here we see the Bizarro Batman and trying to get the Bizarro Joker. He's not really the Bizarro Joker, but he might as well be. Here they are with their boys again. This is an exciting comic. Superman's grilling hot dogs with his X-ray vision, and Batman's asleep, about to have frogs and snakes jump on his groin. So that's this cover. Again, here we go. We've got weird variants in the future of Superman and Batman. Batman there has rockets on his belt, and they're fighting they're opposite villains in the future. The Muto is the guy that looks like Lex Luthor with a big orange head, and the Joker looks much more stylish there. For the 200th issue, they got Neil Adams to do a really nice drawing of Batman and Robin, and then in a desperate urge to try to signal their history, they made this cover incredibly difficult to look at. It's like, it's a good idea, but guys, it didn't quite work. Anyway, now we're in the 70s. We see the women's lib movement, including Batgirl, who's no longer got a run in her stockings, and they are all upset with Batman because he's a bachelor. That's a pretty mixed message, if you ask me. And it's obvious there were no women working on this Batman comic at the time, or they'd probably say, you know, this isn't exactly what women's lib is all about. We want to get married to Batman. You know, this is one way to start over. I forget who commanded him, and he didn't really blow up Wayne Manor, but I like the cover anyway. Okay, this one's fairly well known. They didn't want to exactly rip off the Beatles. They came pretty close, though. Neil Adams did this cover, and it's all about finding out which one was dead. The story is actually interesting because it turns out that every one of the Beatles was killed except for Paul. So there you go. I'm not making this up, but it will definitely turn your head around. This is probably the worst Batman character ever. He's blind, but he can see through his fingertips. I'd hate to see what happens when he goes to the bathroom, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is 1969 or so, and you can see that DC still decided that Asian people were bright orange and carried hatchets. It's supposed to be a kind of a gag cover. The gag doesn't work anymore, folks. It didn't work then. On the other hand, Batman was always happy to roll over what he considered to be the counterculture. Here the Teen Titans are having a demonstration because I guess there are a lot of homeless people in Gotham City. And Batman just says, oh, just crush those kids. What the hell? Well, this is kind of the way comic books are made, ladies and gentlemen. You sit at a table until somebody comes in with an automatic weapon and threatens you unless you meet the deadline. And if you miss the deadline, then they shoot you. And that's how comics are made. All right. We're finally in the last phase of our show here. We're going a little quicker than I thought, but I'll linger on these a little bit. But these are all what we call Robin in the Corner comics. And I could blow through these really quickly, but you're going to notice that the covers themselves are really good. Here's the Zebra Batman. This was based on a Life magazine story showing the flux lines around you magnetically if they film you with a certain kind of camera. They used it for this. Somehow Batman now looks like a bad car seat cover. But Robin's in the corner to explain what's going on. That's the key. Here again, Robin's in the corner. By the way, these were both those toys that I showed you. Again, Robin now is really explaining what's going on. Batman turned into a negative man and light beams are gradually destroying him. Now, as you'll notice, too, Robin is almost always in the same pose, but never exactly the same pose. If I went through these quickly, you'd notice they would animate his arm. Here's the Beast of Koba Bay, probably a Godzilla reference here. But Robin doesn't need to be explaining anything. He's just shocked in the way Robin is in the corner of a comic. Here Robin definitely needs to be explaining it because now Batman is a genie. Criminals are holding the lamp, but again, this is not really about the Batman that everybody knows these days. He's crazy, but not in the same way. Yep, he's still here. And there's Batwoman. She's got a strange glow. And then the big change. Robin's in the other corner. And here they find some weird-looking monsters are hanging out in the Batcave. Then Batman turns into a robot. You saw Robin as a robot earlier. Now Batman's the robot. And Robin is still shocked. Even though he was a robot himself, he doesn't seem to think about that. Or maybe he's just got empathy. Again, no comment here. The alien's taking over for a change, which I think is nice. Again, Batman's thinking this, but it doesn't end. And by the way, these aren't the only covers. I mean, this is a fraction of the covers with Robin in the corner. Now people actually collect them. No, that's not me as the turd. That's Clayface, ladies and gentlemen. Their Robin really has a big explanation. A flying jail set electrified. Batman has fallen victim to one of the underworld treasure hunt traps. So there's about 5 elements there that he's giving you before you can figure out what the hell's going on here. And at this point, Robin says, the hell with it. I think I'm not going to stand in this corner anymore. I want to be in the main scene on the cover. All right, well, DC decided, well, let's amp up the interest in Jerry Lewis. So one of the first things they did was adding Batman and Robin to Jerry Lewis comics, and we see the Joker has got Joker's Health Club there, playing Goldfinger, except not with Jerry Lewis's crotch, but with his head instead to be cut in two by a laser. It's ho-ho homicide. Can't beat that for good writing. This is something from, I believe, the late 80s, a series that took the DC characters and had their counterparts if they were in the real world. This is a mentally challenged young black man who decides to protect his neighborhood by riding around on his bicycle and playing the Batman song on his transistor radio. Not a bad story, but not the Batman most people expect. Now, Batman went into all kinds of merchandise. This is probably the image we all remember the most, is the Batman from the Batman model kit that Aurora put out. And Batman also resulted in a lot of secondary things. Here's a little cheap paperback that's all jokes, sex jokes with a Jewish tone, because it's Batfink and Reuben. And it's just as brilliant as this cover would indicate. Then we have this oddity. I think this is from, looks like Spanish on the cover, but it might be from the Philippines for all I know. But it's Batman by, and that's all I'm going to say. That cover kind of says scads. I saw this not too long ago, a Batman bong. I think somebody really doesn't understand what Batman's about. And this is possibly the worst Batman merchandise ever. Don't touch that trigger. And don't touch that trigger either. This is when DC tried to convince the world that after 20 different people examined and worked on this comic, that it went to press with Batman's naked organ. And then they act shocked. Fans and stores amped up the price on the comics and did lots of reprints because it got in the news. And of course, that leads to the end of every Oddball Comics show, ladies and gentlemen. You'd be disappointed if I didn't show this Rifleman cover. And I don't think I need to go into it. We all saw how I got here. Thank you all. Have a good Comic-Con. See you soon at a Flesh and Bones Comic-Con. Take care.